But he got our guest speaker here tonight, who is David Meltzer. David is a security industry pioneer with 20 years of experience in cybersecurity, bringing a unique blend of technical experience, entrepreneurial skill, and marketing vision to his current position as Tripwire's Chief Technology Officer. Tripwire is also owned by Belden, which makes them a Grass Valley sister company, although I understand they're leaving you alone so far. So that's good. David joined Tripwire through its acquisition of Encircle, where he served as CTO and Vice President of Engineering. Immediately prior to joining Encircle, David was founder and CTO at, is that Cambria or Cambria?
Cambia.
Cambia, whoops. I come from the Central Coast recently, so Cambria, Cayucas, Morro Bay. Where he pioneered the industry's first agentless configuration compliance auditing solution. And I'm sure he'll explain what that is. The ISS X-Force. David is credited with the discovery of numerous security vulnerabilities, and he holds a BS in computer science from Carnegie Mellon. So without further ado.
And thanks for having me, and thanks for inviting me here. I know you all came out to hear a little bit about security, and I'm going to talk to you about what's going on in the security world today, but I have an ulterior motive. I want to find out more about what's going on in the broadcast industry today, and I'm going to share some experience that I've had over the last 20 years. I don't know if anyone ever saw there used to be a reality show called When Animals Attack. And then there was like Animals Attack 2, 3, I think they had a lot of them. This presentation is going to be a little bit about what happens when IP attacks your industry. And in fact, I've seen this tape play out multiple times with multiple industries, going back to IT, which I'm sure everyone has some level of familiarity with, went from proprietary protocols, and it used to be Banyan Vines and Novell, and things were all proprietary and disconnected, and everything got interconnected. And everything got standardized around using IP. And that was great. There was a lot of reasons that happened. It optimized solutions. It let things get connected together. It let different kinds of devices talk to each other. That was fantastic. That same thing is happening today in the industrial market, which is like utility companies. Your power generation systems are getting connected together over IP now. It's happening in the Internet of Things, which I'm sure you all hear about. It's happening in oil and gas companies. It's happening on manufacturing floors where they actually build and make things. So we have this transition that's happening and going on in these different industries. And what we see here is there's a lot of things that we can look back in the past and see what happened when people adopted IP. And I've gone back through a lot of the data and the history and said, let's look back a couple of years and said, what happens when new devices show up and they adopt IP, and let's put a security lens on it and see what happens to it from a security perspective. And so I'm going to share a lot of that data. I'm not going to get too much into numbers, but I'm going to show you a bunch of charts and graphs and talk about what's happened in these different industries. And I hope as I go through, you can help me appreciate how are these same things either going to happen or not going to happen in the broadcast industry. Because talking to some of the people from Grass Valley over the last year, I've learned that there's a broad adoption of IP in broadcast that's going on. And some of the similarities in what I'll talk about happening in the industrial world, I think are very often going to be applicable to what's going to happen in broadcast. So love to get feedback as we go. Feel free to interrupt me and ask questions and make comments. And I may ask you some questions as we go as well. So please keep it interactive. And if you need help with that, there's more beer over there. I'm sure that'll help. As you heard, I've been in the security industry for 20 years. Before that, I used to go break into computers for about 10 years. And before that, I was like 10 years old. So like my entire life has been really focused around cybersecurity. For the last 2 years or so, Tripwire, which I'm the CTO of, has been part of Belden. And that's actually gotten me some really good perspective of different industries. Belden includes Tripwire, which is our network security business platform. It includes Grass Valley for the broadcast business. And then they also have a significant business around industrial IT. which is working with manufacturing companies and industrial automation vendors, utility companies, transportation systems. And so I've gotten to bring my experience over the last couple of years in IT security into this industrial market, and just started to play a little bit and have a little bit of communication over on the broadcast side. So I come with a background of knowing very little about what you all do, but knowing a lot about security. I want to give you 2 minutes and just tell you what Tripwire does, because I think I'll give you a little bit of background of where I'm coming from. Tripwire makes what we call foundational security controls. So when you go into an IT network or an industrial network and you think about what are the basic things in security that every company needs to have, that's some of the things that Tripwire provides to our customers. We make things that detect changes on systems. So system starts in a secure state. Someone malicious makes a change to it, we'll detect those changes happen in the environment. So we help identify malicious activity. We help identify unauthorized activity on those systems as well. We do vulnerability assessment, which means we'll go look at your laptop, your network devices, your routers, your servers, and tell you where are the risks in that environment, and give you some guidance of what could you do to remediate those risks. So we help people identify where risks are, harden their attack surface, and then identify if changes happen that take it out of that secure state. Again, we started in IT, but we've kind of moved into the industrial space as well. Half of the Fortune 500 use Tripwire technology, so I get to go visit our customers a lot, and I talk to lots of very big companies. In fact, a lot of media companies use Tripwire's technology, but it's mostly on the IT side. So they're protecting their critical servers and their critical systems on the IT side using our technology. So now I want to talk to you a little bit about what do I see happening in the security world today. And let me tell you, it's never been a better time to be in cybersecurity. It's in the news all the time. Security has gone from kind of an IT thing under the covers to front page news all the time. And in the election, security was all over the place. You saw DDoS attacks that are happening on the internet, and when people can't get access to their systems, and news sites are going down, and you hear all about what Russia's doing and Iran's doing and what China's doing. Security is just a really hot topic for everyone right now. Let me tell you some of the things that are driving what's happening in the security world. First thing is, a major trend is the number of devices that are out there. And I'm sure you see this, everyone's heard about the Internet of Things. But to put a few numbers on this, back 10 years ago, there were 1 billion devices in the world that were IP connected to protect. By the end of this decade, there will be 50 billion devices that are IP connected. And the implications of this huge explosion in the number of devices really is changing the way that we need to think about security in the industry. We've learned from the past that we went from a very manual approach to securing things. Like when someone had 10 servers I needed to keep secure, that was one challenge. But now people have thousands of servers and tens of thousands of servers, and these servers are going to things like the cloud, and servers are getting elastic, meaning they're spinning up and they're turning down, and people are starting 100 of them, running them for a minute, and then they're disappearing. So the idea of how would you secure an environment that's constantly changing, that's exploding in the number of things you need to protect, but also the kinds of devices that are getting connected into the internet, into IP today, are very different from what it was 10 years ago. So the way that you need to approach thinking about securing these new things is actually quite different from what it used to be in the past. We've all seen security breaches are happening more frequently today than they ever have before. In fact, if you look at some of the statistics, we're seeing many more breaches that are successful happening across all different sorts of industries. Many of these breaches are not very impactful to businesses. So if you go into any large company today, the question you ask them isn't, have you ever been breached? The answer is, yes, we are being breached constantly. And what we try and do is we try and limit how much damage it causes so that it doesn't turn out to be a big deal for us. So what you get in the news, what ends up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, are these gigantic breaches. And usually the reason it turns into a very gigantic breach is it happened and then it persisted in the network for days and weeks and months. And so it was able to kind of spread its tentacles around the network, gather all the data it needed, or exfiltrate data out of the system, or infiltrate all these different kinds of environments. When people are able to catch the problems quickly, they can very much limit the damage. The other thing that people are often thinking about today is what are the kinds of breaches we're going to start seeing in the future. Almost all the news you see today is about data breaches. They stole my credit card numbers. They stole the confidential data that was within the organization. They stole personal information. Healthcare has actually lost the most number of records in the entire world over the last year. And in fact, most people would say that there's kind of a fatigue around that that's happened right now. It's like, how many times could someone steal my name, social security number, and date of birth before I just don't care anymore, right? Like, China already has all my information. They can't keep stealing it. There's nothing more to be lost. And so in this kind of personal information realm, I think we've already seen kind of the peak of that happening. But now attackers are shifting some of their focus into things like physical systems. And that's what, when I work with utility companies and manufacturing organizations, we're talking about what are the breaches that are going to impact the physical systems and what kind of damage could that cause. And that could be a very different kind of breach than someone who's just stealing personal information. Another big trend that's happening, and this affects everyone who works in security, there's what we would call a big skills gap in the security industry today. And that there's over 1 million unfilled security jobs that are open today. Just can't hire people fast enough. In fact, this impacts all of our customers because very often they want to add more security into their organization, but they just can't hire people. And so the way that they're thinking about solving security problems is different because they can't hire people fast enough to actually implement the projects that would improve their security. People are looking at more automation. They're looking at how can I outsource this? How can I use managed services? One of the other interesting statistics about this is it usually takes over 3 months to hire people in security. Within the IT realm, security is the fastest growing from a salary perspective. So salaries in the IT security industry increased 6% last year, and that was on top of an average of IT that was about half that. So if you're looking for something new to do, security is a really great industry. And that shortage is really anticipated to continue at least through 2021. But it might be actually even further and longer than that. I come from the security side, and very often we like to talk about all the things that we're doing right, and how our security controls will protect your organization. If I was going to try and sell you something, I'd probably start by talking about how we can reduce the risk by implementing our products. But because it's a little bit different group, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about what's not working in security. And here's a good example. How many people know what phishing is? All right, good majority. So phishing is, some attacker sends an email, looks to be from some malicious source. They try and make it look like it came from your boss or one of your colleagues, and they try and get you to click something, and that's how they break into your network. Phishing is actually the #1 way that attackers make their way into corporate networks today. So let me ask you another question, which is how many of you that work for some sort of large company get security awareness training? All right, so maybe half. One of the things that most people do today around security awareness training is they tell you about phishing. And someone who raised their hands, what do they tell you to do about phishing?
Report, don't click.
Don't click, right? If you see a suspicious email from someone, don't click. This is my email address. So here's why security is not working. The #1 strategy most companies use to prevent phishing is they give training to their employees and they say don't click suspicious links. So let me ask you another question. How do you know if an email that says it came from me actually came from me?
You don't. You're phishing.
What?
You're phishing.
Very difficult. So
unless you're using PKI.
PKI is a good solution.
What about Gmail?
Gmail. Yeah, I mean, Gmail, it could come from Gmail. It could come from any address.
No, I meant will Gmail detect it if it's somebody spooking?
No. I mean, it has it's not, there's different security tools that will try and pick it out. But if you're an individual and you get an email from me, the best way that you could figure out if it was actually from me is you look at the email header. You kind of go to the source code of the email and look at all the information of where it came from. That's the email header for my email address, typical email. I know that's kind of hard to read, so let me blow it up a little bit. So here's a little bit more detail. You can see more information, what kind of mail server, IP addresses, host names, the kind of chain of different systems that it went through to get to me. Does anyone want to hazard a guess? Does that actually mean that the email came from me, or was that a phishing attack? Almost impossible to tell. So the security strategy that in IT we take to prevent phishing, which is the #1 way people break into networks, is to tell our employees to identify suspicious emails and don't click the links, when it is nearly impossible for someone, even like me, who's been in security for 20 years, to figure out if the email came from the right person. So we're fighting a losing battle here. It's just not working, right? And this is something that we see with different kinds of security controls all over the place, of the things that we're trying to do are not working.
So software couldn't be written to detect that as well as you?
Well, here's the fundamental problem. And now I'm going to relate it a little bit back to what's happening in broadcast and the future of broadcast, which is fundamentally, email was not built in a secure way. Email was not built so that you could positively identify whether a source email address really came from the right person. And so unless you want to go back to how email works and re-architect it, you're just not going to solve this problem this way. And if you're, I work for a security vendor. We make security tools. All we can do is layer on top of an insecure protocol that wasn't built to be able to have authenticated, authorized email source addresses. So it's not a way that you can really solve this problem. Now there's another problem here, which is it's really hard to re-architect the entire email architecture of the internet, right? That's a really tough problem to solve. And now that we're decades after email was written and built and architected, it's really hard to solve. You wish you could have this conversation with the people who were architecting the system 20 years ago and said, let's think about what's going to be the future and what people are going to do from an attack perspective. I'll give you one more example. Antivirus. Okay, PC versus Mac users. How many PC users here? Windows users? All right, Mac users? Not too many Mac users. All right, how many of your Windows users, how many of you use antivirus on your system? Pretty good percent, right? This is statistics that we came out of one of our partners that works in this industry around how effective are antivirus products at detecting new viruses that come out today. In the first hour that a virus comes out, antivirus software picks up about 30% of those new viruses. Within a day of it coming out, it picks up about 2/3 of them. And then within a month, it's getting 93% of all the viruses that are out there. So here's what antivirus works for. If someone puts out a new virus and they were attacking someone over here, and you're someone way over here, and it just makes its way over to you like a week or 2 weeks or a month later, it's actually pretty good at stopping those kind of attacks. If someone writes a virus and they target you with the virus, antivirus is very ineffective at actually detecting those viruses. The reason is the way people build these malware today is the signature for malware changes every time they attack someone new. And so it's in this constant catch-up mode of trying to find what these signatures are, but you're only catching it when you're not the first person. You're only catching it when you're like a week later or a month later. And this is something that, again, it's not working. So I work with industrial customers. In industrial, I'm going to talk more about this. They started adopting IP. They have a lot of Windows PCs in those environments. The first thing people told them to do, install antivirus on all of your systems. I kind of go back and say, that doesn't work. So like, why are you taking this approach when these kind of controls are not working in this kind of environment? So I want to now go back to these trends that I've seen over the last 20 years. And this is not a numeric graph. This is like a psychological graph. So this is how people think about vulnerabilities of new things that get introduced into industries. And I want to talk about new things like new keeps happening in the technology industry. We love new stuff. Anything that new comes out, I buy it. It's just the way I work. I was the #2 delivery route for Amazon in my neighborhood. And the UPS driver came up to me and said, yeah, that lady who's #1, she has a real problem. So I like new. We saw this with IP connected devices. We saw it with the web. And we saw it with mobile devices and industrial control devices and IoT. And you probably all have some different IoT devices. So there's good reasons that people put out this new stuff. There's good reasons that new things come out. They provide new ways of our business operating. They provide new value to me as a consumer. And I can do new cool things. I can track all the stuff that's going on in my life. The reality is, most of the time as a consumer or as a business, you get something new into your environment. You're thinking, it's probably secure. if I even care about whether it's secure. That's not the, I'm thinking about the value it provides. I'm not thinking about, is it a secure system or was it built in a secure way? And the reality is, people don't really think about things are inherently insecure when they're brand new. In fact, you probably think just the opposite. Like all that old stuff that's been around for a while, I know they didn't care about security when those things were built. But now it's brand new and people, of course, they built security into it. The reality is that's actually probably not the case at all. And that's what history tells us, is usually security is not built into these things from the beginning. And so we have a perception that they're actually more secure than they are. So here's what happens after that. Eventually a security researcher, like I used to be in like Tripwire, we have a bunch of young guys who go and they break into new things that show up, and they have a great time doing it. They go look at these things and they say, wow, this was really easy to hack. And they go publish those results. And now you have all these vulnerabilities that show up for your 3D printer and your wearable device and your new applications. And so now people start to realize, wow, these things aren't really as secure as I thought they were. So the perception of how secure these devices are actually goes way down. So the perception of the vulnerability of them goes way up. The reality is, it's actually much more dangerous time once these researchers start looking at systems. So you're in kind of this ignorance, and ignorance is bliss sometimes, very early on when something new shows up. Once the researchers start targeting it, now they write vulnerabilities, they publish vulnerabilities, and then what happens is one person finds the vulnerability, the second person writes a tool, posts it on the internet so anyone can click a button and go break into that system. And so now we have these, all I gotta do is like Google the name of the device, I can find an exploit for it, and I can go break into that system. So now it's really easy to break into these new things that exist. So the actual risk to these systems goes way up. Well, let me take you to the third part of the curve, which is once security researchers pound on something long enough, the systems actually get more secure. I found all the easy vulnerabilities for them. I found all the easy ways to break into them, and we start to build things in a more secure way. The vendors, and I've seen this trend go over and over, once you've reported like the 50th vulnerability to their system, their R&D team and their head of QA says, we better start looking at why do they keep finding these problems? We better start doing something differently. Maybe we should test for vulnerabilities before we ship the product in the future. All this pattern starts happening, and then what happens is these systems actually get built in a more secure way. Then you get to the end of the curve, and the end of the curve is we actually are building systems in a very secure way today, and there aren't a lot of vulnerabilities that still exist in them. But the perception is actually just the opposite. I'll give you a good example, which is Microsoft. You probably all know Microsoft in Windows has thousands of vulnerabilities that have been discovered in it over the years. And most people would perceive Microsoft as being one of the most insecure software vendors in the world because of all these different vulnerabilities. The reality is Microsoft probably has the most mature security software development lifecycle of any company in the world. They've been hammered so many times that they've built security in very well from the ground up. But the world doesn't perceive it that way. The world perceives it that they have a lot of vulnerabilities and they're actually really insecure. So this is this new thing vulnerability curve. Anything new that shows up that's newly connected, that's a new kind of device, that's a new industry adopting IP, is going to go through this curve of the perception of how vulnerable it is versus the reality of how vulnerable it is. And so it's interesting to think about, are these security researchers actually helpful to people who have new devices that they come out with, or are they actually hurting you? And having been one a while and actually talk to these people all the time, I'll give you a little bit of my perspective on this. The first thing that I'll say about it is security researchers are not looking for vulnerabilities in your systems to help you. And they're not looking for things to hurt you either. They're kind of indifferent to the end vendors who are making it. Here's the reasons researchers look for vulnerabilities. One, there's a market for vulnerabilities that's out there today, which means if they can find a vulnerability in one of these systems, people will pay them for that. In fact, people will pay them in the black market. So people who want to go exploit systems and break into them will pay big money for vulnerabilities into systems that they want to find problems in. But actually, security companies will pay them for these vulnerabilities too. Because there's this market where if I can find a vulnerability, I can bake it into my security software and I can go sell that to different customers. So there's a market for the good guys too. There's a third market that's been emerging over time, and it's called the bug bounties. I don't know how many people have heard that term of a bug bounty program before. But now the vendors realize if I don't pay these researchers for vulnerabilities that they find in my software, they're going to go sell it to either a hacker group who's going to go use it to exploit my systems maliciously, or they're going to sell it to a security company, which is going to make me really look bad because they're going to make a lot of news. They're going to put out a press release. They're going to go speak at a conference about this vulnerability. And so there's this market that exists. For my security researchers that work at our company, it's also a lot of street cred. We pay our security researchers a lot of money, and they're in very high demand. So if they can find a vulnerability in a new cool system, if they can find it in an Apple iPhone, that's great. But if they can find it that's something kind of new, nobody's looked at before, they'll go talk about that at a security conference. They'll get people who will pay them more money. They'll get job offers. It's really great credibility for them. Now, let me now flip and say, well, what does it mean to actually a vendor who's actually making something new, a new kind of device? I would say if you're being ignored by security researchers, that has some benefits. And there's a lot of reasons people get ignored. In the industrial world particularly, people ignored these systems for a long time because they were expensive, because there weren't a lot of companies in the world that actually had the systems. And you think about something that's making a food production line, one of those industrial systems. How many people have those? You can't just get on eBay and buy them very easily. They're not things that people have widely disseminated. It's not like consumer software. It's not like Windows that everyone has or you can just go download. And so being ignored is good. But the problem with being ignored is the sophisticated attackers who can get access to these systems then have a field day actually going and breaking into them, because nobody's actually looked to find how easy would it be to break into these systems. So it's easy to exploit them, but there aren't a lot of published vulnerabilities about them. That's what happens if you're ignored. Once security researchers wake up and say, hey, I could go look for vulnerabilities in your systems, and this happens in all different industries over time. It happened in the industrial world, not because a company like Tripwire could go buy a power substation. We still don't buy power substations to look for vulnerabilities, but our customers actually invite us in and said, you should go look for vulnerabilities in our environment. In fact, we have a QA lab, and if you would come in and look for these things, that would help us. And so if you're a device manufacturer, it's your customers who are going to give the security researchers access to your systems because they want to know about the vulnerabilities. And so once they find those vulnerabilities, then you start getting these things published. So all the easy pickings, all of the easy to exploit things start getting exploited and they start getting fixed. So it gets you down this vulnerability curve where these systems actually end up being much more secure. Here's the interesting thing that happens over time. And this kind of goes to, is it helpful or is it hurtful? I have this debate a lot with our researchers, which is if you're an end user of one of these new devices and security researchers have spent a lot of time trying to break into these systems, what happens is people who are running old versions and end-of-life products are getting very easily broken into now because there's all these exploits that are publicly available out in the wild. But the difference is if someone keeps updated with, they update a new patch, they install a new firmware, they're keeping their systems up to date with the latest versions that are coming out from the vendors, those systems are incredibly harder to exploit than things that were being ignored by the researcher. So you just imagine, I have a new Internet of Things device. The researchers found 50 vulnerabilities in it. The vendor fixed 50 vulnerabilities in it. Now a sophisticated hacker comes along and they say, I want to break into that system. They have a really hard time. There's a lot of smart researchers that already found all those easy to fix, easy to solve problems. And so you get this kind of different viewpoint if you look at it from, well, are the security researchers going to ignore this, or are the security researchers going to pay attention to this?
Do you have statistics on actual people updating? Because as you said,
yeah.
So a huge target, iOS,
yep.
and Apple pays extreme amount of money depending on what,
yep.
The ring you're in based on OS. But as far as people updating,
yep.
Because it comes down to human factors. Like you said, phishing is the easiest way to get into anything on a pen test.
Yep.
So on update-wise, everybody, it's a known vulnerability. You're talking about it goes out there, so a script could easily, even going back to the low orbit ion cannon, just click a button and go.
Yep.
What are people doing as far as updating.
Yeah, so this depends very much on vendors, and it goes back to that vulnerability curve as well. Apple is very good about getting people updating to newer versions of iOS. They publish a lot of statistics about that. Microsoft has tons of tools available to their customers to help people update their systems so they get out of getting older versions of what they're doing. Well-run large organizations, large enterprises, Fortune 500 companies, they will patch most of their Windows systems within 24 hours of Microsoft patches coming out, because Microsoft has focused so much attention on this patch cycle. Industrial control systems, like programmable logic controllers that sit in manufacturing floors, it could be 5 years before someone updates those systems. And that's actually a really hard thing for the industrial environments, which is the vendors have not built easy to use ways of updating these systems quickly. And in fact, that's what's happening in the industrial world that's so dangerous, which is we're finding lots of vulnerabilities, but people aren't patching them. And so this exploitation curve, it's getting easier and easier to exploit these environments, but we're not going down in the actual vulnerability because people aren't fixing the problems in the live production systems.
Are they at least blocking stuff at the perimeter? I mean, SCADA,
Yeah,
got an issue with timing, but
that's what they're trying to do. In fact, I'll talk a little bit more about that one as well. So let me just give you a picture of what's actually happening here. In the IT world, there's over 70,000 different vulnerabilities that exist for IT systems today. And this has been going on for almost 15 years from the time people really started looking for vulnerabilities in IT systems. In the industrial control world, people only really started heavily researching industrial control vulnerabilities starting in around 2010. So you saw a few of them between 2005, 2010, but it's really only been about the last 5-6 years. There are 1,500 vulnerabilities in total that exist for industrial control systems. But you can see kind of the trend. Once researchers start to pick it up, they start to realize these systems were not built securely and they're vulnerable. They publish some findings. Other researchers say, hey, this sounds like fertile ground. I'm going to go look for these. I'm going to go talk to different customers. I'm going to get access to these systems. And this thing just starts to kind of grow and grow and grow. One of the really important kind of concepts to pick up around this is you see there's 1,500 known vulnerabilities for industrial control systems. Almost every single one of those vulnerabilities has existed for over 10 years in those environments. None of those vulnerabilities are new. It's not like a vendor wrote a new piece of software, released it, and now we found a vulnerability. These are things that have existed for decades in many cases. It's systems that were built when security wasn't really being considered. That's why it's such fertile ground for security researchers. And this is the challenge that people in the industrial world have today, which is we're still discovering a lot of those vulnerabilities, and it's really still fairly easy for a security researcher or someone malicious to look at a new industrial control system and say, I'm going to find a new way to break into that system. When you go to our security researchers, if they look at a system that they know not many people have touched before from our security perspective, that's like, they struck gold. That's the jackpot, because they will always find a way to break into those environments.
Is there anything like a UL rating for security, or
Yeah.
people trying to? Okay.
Yeah, people are there's actually a group that's trying to put together something like that. And in fact, the question is, how would you solve these problems? You could try and put it on the vendors to solve it themselves. You could try and get the government to regulate it, or you could try and get some sort of private organization that could try and enforce some sort of standards. And all of those things are happening at different kinds of levels. For the utility sector, there's a regulation called NERC, which means for utility companies, they will be fined, and they are getting fined serious amounts of money if they don't do the basics of security for the utility power grid. But if you go into other industries that are not US critical infrastructure, there's no regulation around those things. And so it's really then up to the users and the consumers and businesses to decide what level of security am I willing to accept. And traditionally, for new things that have come out, people focus more on the value of the system than the security of the system. That trend takes a while to catch up and say, well, I should really be thinking about the security of these environments.
In this chart, how many target systems are we talking about? Is this, for the industrial control systems, is this thousands of different architectures, or it's...
Yeah, so, there's really a half dozen large industrial automation vendors out there. Companies like Rockwell, ABB, Schneider, Siemens, Yokogawa. Each one of those companies makes hundreds of different kinds of devices and hundreds of different versions of each one of those devices. So if you covered like those 6 vendors, those are like the Microsofts and the Oracles of the IT world in ICS. But you know, you then go overlay that with the customer base. You know, there's tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of these devices that are out there. So just to kind of give you one more trend of, you know, how we see this thing evolving, this is a trend of how hard is it to break into systems versus how sophisticated are attacks getting today. And here's the trend that you see. It used to be, for IT systems, and this trend, this is a graph for industrial systems, it used to be really, really hard to break into an industrial control system because only people who really knew what those proprietary protocols were, how those systems worked, how do you talk to them, and had access to the systems could break into them. Today, it is extremely easy for someone to break into an industrial control environment because all you got to do is Google some tools on the internet, download them, and you can get direct access to them. In fact, there are people who wrote software that crawls the internet looking for industrial systems, and they publish a list of where they all exist on the internet. And so I know where they are, I have the tools to exploit them. In many ways, it might be something like a firewall, as we mentioned before. That's the only thing that's protecting these systems is a firewall that's keeping you out of that industrial network. Well, guess what? Firewalls are, you know, there's a billion different ways people get around them. They plug in, you know, they drop USB drives outside of the environment. People check their email from the industrial network, and we know about phishing attacks. People surf websites from operator workstations, and people do they call drive-by downloading attacks. So I find which website this guy is going to go use to check his news. I attack that system, and now next time they go to it, I go download a piece of software to them. So there's all different ways people kind of bypass that firewall to make their way into the network. The way that people think about what's the impact of incidents that might occur in their environment, this is another trend that we've gotten really good data on. The average cost of a data breach in IT today is $4 million. So if I'm an organization and someone steals my credit card data that I'm holding for customers, or my personal information for customers, or a customer list, it costs me about $4 million to clean up and respond to that. The most expensive breaches that we've ever seen in IT have cost about 100 times that. So like some of the biggest breaches, you probably heard of some of them. Target was one of the biggest breaches that's ever happened. OPM, the government breach of the Office of Personnel Management, that was the most expensive breach to ever clean up. They had, you know, someone, probably China, but someone stole like all of the classified information about all of the employees of the federal government. So those are very expensive. But I want to kind of contrast that to the ICS world. When we think about incidents, you can think about intentional incidents. I'll kind of contrast that. There are also incidents that happen that are just inadvertent. So the power outage that happened in the Northeast, which was about 13 years ago now, cost $6 billion, created $6 billion of damage. And it was actually caused by a software flaw. So when someone's thinking about breaking into a malicious industrial system, and they're thinking about doing something bad to it, we think about the risks in terms of orders of magnitude greater damage that they could cause than what would be happening from a data breach or an IT breach. This is why people are so concerned about industrial control system security today. So let me kind of now cut over and tell you a little bit more about when we think about industrial control system security, what does that all mean? And I'm really interested, as I go through each one of these concepts, for you all to tell me, is this the same thing as broadcast, or is this different from what's happening in broadcast? So I'm gonna pull you as I go here. First, a little bit of terminology. This is a typical industrial system. This is a Rockwell Automation, Allen Bradley. I think one of those is a Control Logic's programmable logic controller. Basically, these are little embedded computing devices that are controlling physical systems, like a robot arm or a sensor or a motor on a manufacturing floor. Or a centrifuge. In fact, I'll show you that example. I think you already know what it is in that case. So these programmable logic controllers, you think of people talk about ICS, OT, SCADA systems. People also talk about the industrial Internet of Things, which is all these devices getting IP connected. What's happened here in the industrial environment is 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, these systems all spoke proprietary protocols. Let me go back further in time. 50 years ago, there were manufacturing floors, and they had systems that connected one system to another over just a wire. You know, it was a wire for communication. wires turned into cables, and they started with doing serial communication. So one device could talk to another device. Eventually people realized, well, I want multi-point communication. So they created in industrial what we call field bus systems. And the idea of a field bus is now I can have one system, I can put 10 systems on one bus, and now they can start to communicate with each other. But it's still kind of a flat communication. It's still proprietary protocols. Every vendor that I talked about, ABB, Schneider, Siemens, Yokogawa, Rockwell, they all had their own protocol. Their systems only talked to their own systems, and nobody else could talk to any of those. And nobody understood how those protocols worked because it was all just completely proprietary. These systems were built to live for like 20 or 30 years, and nobody was even thinking about security when these systems were first built. And when I say not thinking about security, no authentication, no authorization, no access control. If you could talk to the device, you had complete access to do anything on that device you wanted. The only reason that these systems never got exploited was nobody knew what they did, nobody knew how to talk to them, and the only people who really had physical access to these systems were people who were responsible for managing them. In the ICS world, these are mostly control engineers. And so really the risk, and I'll show you some examples of what happened, was a small group of control engineers who were insiders going rogue. Because those are the only people who could really know how to exploit any of these systems. These systems were also built to be very latency sensitive. They weren't built to be connected to other systems. And even touching them, sending the wrong command, sending the wrong communication over the wire, could topple them over and break the whole environment. And we saw this happen time and time again. So this is the way that industrial control systems built out. How does this relate to broadcast? Who wants to tell me what's the same and what's different? Anyone? I don't know who to call on here. So.
It's sort of developed the same way.
Yeah.
And today, we're pursuing standardized protocols on IP networks. And harnessing the protocols that have been standardized for IP, through our ATM.
Yep.
So we're headed in the same direction. We've come from the same place too.
Yep.
We have very simple parallel control and then serial control, bespoke custom protocols.
It started on physically isolated networks, on simple hubs, and now we're on Cisco Blade servers where if somebody screws up a VLAN config, you're suddenly on the outside.
Yep. Sounds quite similar. Yep. And here's what's happened, because I've had a lot of conversation with control engineers. In fact, control engineers are talking to IT security people much more frequently today. A lot of what we've seen happen now, IT security people, I've seen this kind of play out. In fact, before I knew anything about industrial systems, I was one of these people. I walked into those environments and I talked to the control engineers and I said, let me tell you how we could help you with securing this environment. Let me tell you about the different IT security tools we have that we could go bring in, and we could help assess where the risks are in this environment. And we could go scan your devices and scan your networks and find these risks and figure out when changes are happening in the environment. And here's what the control engineers said to me. They said, yeah, you're not the first IT guy who's ever showed up in this control room. We've had IT people who've showed up over time. Usually what they do is they bring in their IT tools, and they go and they say, I'm just going to find out what you have. And they go scan the network, and they took down my manufacturing floor. And that got rid of them for a couple of years, because that was the first thing that I was concerned about. In fact, I was writing one of these vulnerability assessment tools, and I was a software engineer 20 years ago. And one of the first things I did, first time we made our way into an industrial environment, we scanned a cookie factory, and the cookie production line went down. And that was the last I heard from the cookie factory from that job, right? So that was happening 20 years ago. I went to a fulfillment organization of a very automated fulfillment system about a month ago, and I was recounting the story, and I said, here's what I've learned. We don't walk into these organizations anymore and say, let's go scan them with your IT tools. And he goes, I wish you were here a week ago because we did it. We took down the fulfillment shop for an hour. So 20 years, we're still making these same mistakes. The IT people are still making these challenges. Here's the other thing the control engineer told me. He said, yeah, I see how the IT security network's working. I see how often these systems are getting broken into. I see that you're getting breached all the time. I see that all your data has been stolen constantly in that organization. And what you're telling me is you're going to give me that into my network. You're going to give me that. And by the way, my environment, you could say, my IT head is, oh, these are old systems. The control engineer perspective is, my system's been running for 20 years. It's never gone down. It's never broken. And when it has, I've had redundancy. I've been able to mitigate those risks. And all of the things that you're talking about bringing me from IT just don't sound all that attractive to me. So that's the perspective that I'm often getting from the industrial engineers. I think what they're realizing is the world that they lived in 10 years ago is not the same anymore. These things are getting IP connected. These risks are making their way into these environments. The hackers and the attackers are starting to pay attention to these devices. And so they do too. They need to take a different approach. But I think they need to learn from the mistakes we've made in IT, not try and do the same things in IT that didn't work all that effectively back then, and try and take that same approach for the industrial environment too. One of the things that I do like to talk about with industrial engineers is very often the first thing we talk about security, we think about China, hacktivists, we think about Iran and Russia and these evil crime syndicates in Eastern Europe trying to break into our systems. The reality is most of the software and most of the things that take down environments are not malicious outsiders. Most of the time, it's people accidentally misconfigured the system, and that's why it goes down. And so really, we talk about security in terms of keeping the bad guys out. We need to change that conversation and think about how do we build a more resilient environment. This idea that we have this flat open network where every device can talk to every other device, that's not a very secure design. But that's also a design that we've seen examples of where one system just malfunctions and it starts sending packets out to the rest of the network and takes down all the other environments. And so we need to build resilient systems, and the same things we're going to do to build a resilient network design and system design for security is the same thing that's going to prevent accidents from taking down our network and creating availability problems for our environment. I'm going to skip over some of these things. So how many people know what Stuxnet is? Pretty good sense. So this was probably the NSA, if you believe most of what's in the news, who did an industrial attack against Iran's nuclear program by trying to basically misconfigure their centrifuges. What they did was they took a USB drive, they dropped it outside some plants, people picked up the USB drive, plugged it into their computer. That then infected the operator workstations, which then adjusted how fast the centrifuge spun. This is kind of the most well-known example of industrial attacks. We've seen lots of other examples of industrial attacks too. In the Ukraine, end of last year, probably Russia took down the Ukraine power grid for about 6 hours by breaking into their industrial environment. And here's the interesting thing. We talked about how sophisticated the attack has to be. They actually used probably very unsophisticated ways of making their way into the power grid's network. And then they made a VPN tunnel where control engineers who were probably the same people who set up the systems and ran a power grid before just got a remote desktop into the operator workstations and just sent the commands in to turn it off. And so it's kind of a combination of high security expertise with people who knew that environment, and they were able to shut down these systems. The thing that we worry the most about is in industrial systems is not someone even turning off the power grid, it's people actually being hurt and creating physical harm. We haven't seen a lot of examples of security incidents creating physical harm, but it has happened before. In the Polish tram system, actually a teenager actually derailed 4 trains by using infrared communication to change the switching protocol. So basically, he just physically went up to where the switching system was, and you basically could take a remote control with the right commands and said, this train should go over there. And he actually created a train derailment, actually hurt a bunch of people. And it was that easy. We've seen other examples. This was in Australia, where someone used wireless communication. It was actually someone, a terminated contractor, to go into the wastewater system for the environment, and he released 750,000 gallons of sewage into the environment by using the wireless communication to basically kind of open the floodgates. And he actually did this more than once. 46 different times he opened the floodgates to create physical damage to the environment. And you go back and think about, well, how would you stop these things? A lot of it's basic security controls. The foundation of security, wireless communication that wasn't secured, insider knowledge that wasn't protected, people that there was no access control set up with these environments. Anyone who knew a little bit about how these systems were built could go to these systems and create this physical harm. I'll skip over some of these examples. Here's something that is probably fairly similar to the broadcast realm. In IT, we talk about security in terms of CIA. Confidentiality, integrity, and availability are primary concerns. When it comes to the industrial world, the number one priority of any industrial control engineer is safety. First thing that they ever talk about is safety. You walk into a meeting, first thing you want to do is have a safety briefing about the meeting. The second thing they care about is the availability of the environment. They're less worried that someone's going to steal, how do I make a cookie? It turns out there's a little bit of proprietary knowledge about how to make things, but more of the damage that someone would cause would be just to take down the environment. And so go back to my example, if the IT people take down the environment, they created the second big, most harmful thing that could happen into that environment, which is the availability of the system was compromised. So very often, again, when we talk about industrial security, we change the conversation from, is it data we're trying to protect, or we're worried about someone stealing something, to we're most worried about just keeping the system up. And how do we increase the reliability, resiliency, and uptime of the environment? And again, that's not just outside attackers, that's building a resilient system against mistakes and accidents as well. So back to a couple questions for the group here, which is, where are you in that vulnerability curve? We talked a little bit about these similarities, but the biggest thing that I've been thinking about and talking a little bit to the Grass Valley folks is, how in broadcast could we avoid making some of these same mistakes again? It would be great if the broadcast industry did not end up like IT was and didn't end up like the industrial control environment has been. And what are the things that we could do to build things a little bit differently and not let that happen? So let me talk for just 5 more minutes about what are the things that I think we need to do differently in security. One is, when we talk about how to approach industrial cybersecurity, I think you need to think about keeping it pretty simple. So when you think about, well, what's a broadcast operations network or a playout system look like? What are the different kinds of security things I need to think about? I would think about 3 things. Think about, first, securing the network. If you have a flat open network, if different devices can all communicate with every other device, that is not a resilient network that you've built up. Certainly you want to think about how you keep the bad guys out of the network to begin with, but you need to think about, how can I allow only the systems that need to talk to each other to be able to communicate with each other? Because one of the tenets of security we've learned is just thinking you're going to build one perimeter and keep everything out, and then once I'm on the inside, it's just this wide open system. That is not a resilient network. So think about, how can you build a secure network? Think about wireless communication. Think about segmentation. In the industrial security world, we think about this in terms, there's a term we call zones and conduits. In IT, people call this segmentation. The idea is just make sure everything can't communicate. Define what needs to really communicate with each other. Second thing I want you to all to think about is secure the industrial, in the ICS world, we call it the industrial endpoints. In your world, I would say secure the PCs. So here's the reality in the industrial world. I talk about PLCs and centrifuges and all these different industrial systems. The most common and most likely system to be exploited in an industrial environment is a Windows PC. And it turns out that probably in your broadcast world, there's probably a lot of Windows PCs too. And so think about, how do we secure Windows PCs in a secure way so that we can keep those systems from being exploited? Because what will happen, the way the attacks always work is, I make my way through the network through some attack vector, phishing, USB drives, however, wireless communication, and then I get to the Windows PC, which I have 70,000 vulnerabilities to pick from to try and exploit. And by the way, a lot of times these are embedded systems. Sometimes you have a console, a kiosk, a touch screen. You don't even know it's a Windows embedded system on the back end. But these are the systems that attackers have an easy time exploiting. So you need to start building basic security controls into those Windows systems first, because they're going to then go from there and pivot to the actual production system or the playout system, or what's actually impacting your broadcast environment. The third thing to think about is, okay, I've secured the network and the PCs. Now, what's actually the system that's controlling your process? So how do I secure those end systems? And maybe this is the video playout system. Maybe this is your mixer. I don't know what it is in your broadcast environment. But think about how would I add security controls to those. And again, I think it's the basics of security. Are these systems securely configured? Do they have the latest firmwares on them? Would we know if someone changed them maliciously? Would we even have that visibility? I'll skip over some of this. I'll skip over that. Skip over that. Too much information. This, I think, is the most important concept for the industrial world today, and I would say probably for the broadcast world today as well, which is if I'm sitting in the production environment and trying to figure out how do I add security into the environment at the end, once it's already in production, you're fighting the losing battle. That's the phishing email problem that we're talking about. The only way to really get a secure system is to move back up the supply chain. Go back to the device manufacturers, to the vendors, to the people who are making those components. And by the way, those vendors have to go up the chain too, to who is writing the software components, where are the chips coming from, how are we assembling all these systems. We need to move up that food chain and make sure people are building systems in a secure way from the ground up. Here's the lesson we've learned from 20 years. Unless the customers are holding the vendors accountable to that, they're not building it securely. The history is nobody builds these things securely in a default state. And here's the reason why. It's hard. It's expensive. It slows things down. People who just write software, by default, that's insecure software, unless they add a lot of process into it, unless they add a secure software development lifecycle, unless they're doing threat modeling, unless they're doing source code audits, unless they're bringing in experts to pen test those equipment. Unless all of those things are happening, you're getting insecure systems. And so it's really it's really got to be the customers who are holding those vendors accountable and saying, are you giving me secure systems? When I go to sophisticated manufacturing systems in customers, the number one priority for them is making sure the vendors are paying attention to security. And if they're not, that's where your problem is. And this is some of the same thing that I've been telling some people at Grass Valley of how do you make sure you pay attention to those things. And so that's really what I want to talk about today. You need to understand where these risks are. And there's a few things that we've learned here over 20 years. From that vulnerability curve, you've learned that over 20 years, your perception of the security of new things that you get is way lower than the actual reality of how vulnerable those systems are. So understand that cognitive dissonance you have and start thinking about things, unless they've started to proven to be secure, that these are by default almost certainly insecure systems. The cost of breaches that you're estimating, well, what would be the damage if something insecure happened in our environment? The history shows us that you're probably thinking about these data breaches. You're probably thinking about people stealing information or minor availability issues. The future of the cost of breaches could be dramatically higher than what we've seen in the past. Physical damage, harm to people, harm to physical systems. We know these things can happen, and we just need to make sure that we're thinking about these are the risks that we're trying to solve for. And the last thing I'd leave you with is, if you do the same thing in broadcast as what has been done in IT, it's not going to work. So you really need to be thinking about securing things from the vendor supply chain up, build security into these environments. As this migration to IP is happening, I think you're still early in a lot of that transition. You have an opportunity to make sure that things are architected in a more secure way. Things are built with authentication, authorization, access control, basic foundational security controls, and that your vendors all know, and if you are a vendor, you have to pay attention to security from the beginning of building these devices. If you do that, you'll be in a very different place from where IT has been in the past. So that was my soapbox here today. Wanted to thank you again for inviting me. Happy to stick around and answer any questions you have. But hopefully this has been a little bit insightful for you.
My experience with some newer companies recently is a lot of them are getting into for collaboration reasons. They're getting into like Google Drive and using that for a lot of their company storage and collaboration. What's your take on that as far as?
So Google Drive. So Google takes security very seriously. And Google, but also this is kind of generic to a lot of cloud services. Big companies like Google and Microsoft and Amazon with their cloud, they do a much better job securing their environment than most companies would do themselves. And so when you think about someone running their own email server versus outsourcing it, sometimes security people say, well, we want to hold control. We don't want the data leaving our network. And that, there can be some merit to that. But the reality is it's really hard to do as good a job as these companies who are able to do it at scale. And so I would think putting it on Google is probably safer than sticking it on USB drives or on your internal servers, because they're probably going to be more secure. But the flip side of it is, once it's out there, people have shown that there's a very little chance that things that get out on the internet are going to be protected over an extended period of time. So what I tell people is, if you really care about security, I go back to the old days. Like I say, don't connect it. Keep it offline, like really disconnected. People have a hard time with that. But a good example would be Bitcoins. People probably read about Bitcoins and are familiar with it. The way you keep Bitcoins most secure is they're not connected to any network at all. Physical, paper. That's actually turned out to be a much more secure way than sticking it in the cloud somewhere. So think about what you really need to secure.
Isn't it turning out that air gaps stuff could still be compromised?
Yeah, actually, it's a good question. There's all different kind of good techniques people have. Like, it turns out that like the tuning of a fan on one computer can create different noise that a microphone on another computer could pick up. And so people can adjust the CPU to create noise, pick it up, and transfer data from two disconnected systems that way. So, all different sorts of cool techniques that hackers have come up with to cross air gaps. So that's a really good point. But piece of paper in a safe somewhere, not near any computer. If I really cared about nobody ever seeing something, I might do that before I try to encrypt it in a cloud service somewhere.
What are some of the, I think you might have skipped the slide, but are there recommended practices, standards, whatever, to guide you in implementing security at the endpoints?
So where do you start? It turns out there's something, most large companies adopt what we would call today security frameworks. And I did kind of skip it over from the sake of time, but the idea of a security framework is, I don't want to walk into a company and say, well, I need to invent. I've been in security a long time. I wouldn't want to invent a new way of doing security for a company. So organizations like NIST from the US, ISO, international standards bodies, IEC, which is another international standards bodies, the financial services industry has created some of these. They've created these frameworks that say, these are all the things that make up a secure environment. And here's a process you can go through that will give you a way of continuously improving the security of your environment over time. So most people in the US, they're adopting something called the NIST CyberSecurity Framework, or they're adopting ISO 27002, and they use that as their standard. So if you're looking at kind of, I'm architecting a new environment, and I want to know how do I think about security, go Google the NIST CyberSecurity Framework. Gives you a good perspective on everything.
Yeah, I mean, one thing in broadcast I've seen, I used to be heavily involved with one company, and I've now seen a few other companies at a network level, and the proliferation of passwords being sent and cleared over the network is just mind-boggling. I would have thought they would have secured that with encrypted it somehow. But I guess it's a little hard.
Reusing passwords across different sites is one of the most common attack vectors today. So, that they hack into one large website, and you've seen the hacks at places like Yahoo, and just turns out most people use the same password on some set of other systems. People also aren't very creative about what passwords they use.
But even, use a tool like Wireshark, and you can pick up all the passwords that are being used on a network.
And if you're
a broadcaster.
Yeah, because if you're trying to communicate to systems that were built before people built encryption into the protocols, there's no other way to talk to them than clear text passwords.
Exactly.
So speaking of passwords, how secure do you think those password protection programs are?
Yeah, like password managers, like LastPass, KeePass, 1Password. That is probably better than using, here's what's definitely better. It's better than using the same password on every site, because that's a very poor thing to do. I would worry about a major breach to those password managers that are storing all of your passwords in the cloud, because one breach there would give them access to kind of an exponential number of users and then a number of passwords on different sites. And so I use a password manager. In fact, we use one in our company for different passwords. But I keep that actually distinct from the most secure systems, because I have passwords. Again, I buy a lot of stuff. So I have, I got my frequent flyer systems and 1,000 different websites that I buy stuff from. Frankly, as a consumer, I don't really care if someone steals my information. The credit card company pays for all that, right? Like, how much as a consumer do I care if someone steals my credit card number? It's a minor inconvenience. But there is some stuff that I do care about keeping secure, and I don't put that in the password manager. That's the one thing that I'll keep offline. You don't want to sticky note it on your laptop, but if you could keep it somewhere secure, that's probably your most secure option.
This is an arms race, and who is going to win given that, all the different vulnerabilities that are out there, including putting stuff in the firmware so that
Yeah, who's going to win? I would say if you looked at it today, the hackers are winning. You just look at all the things that are different happening in the media. I did a poll. I was moderating a panel, something called the FSISAC, which is an industry group for financial services. I was with a bunch of the chief information security officers for the biggest financial companies in the United States. And I did a poll of them. I had about 100 of them in the room. Do you think security is going to get better or worse over the next 5 to 10 years? 98% of them thought it was going to get worse. And so, you want to be optimistic about these things, but the hackers are currently ahead of the game. And it's because of that architecture. We have to re-architect how we think about security, and that's going to take a long time.
Yeah, I'm curious about the motivation of the hackers. I can see getting financial records and selling it for profit. I can see maybe some government paying someone to do malicious work. I could see some disgruntled employee wanting to hurt something. Of those three, what's the biggest threat, and are there other motivations I'm not aware of that makes people do these horrible things?
Yeah, I mean, the three big categories I think about it in terms of, and mostly in the security industry we do, nation states, crime syndicates, and hacktivists. So you kind of think about, and when I go in and I talk to big companies, and they've already done all the basics, we start talking about things like threat modeling, or a concept called the design basis threat. So we're starting to think about who would try and break into our environment, what would they try and accomplish, and what are specific things we could do to thwart their capabilities. And the biggest risk for, if you're a government, the most thing you're concerned about is nation states, because they have lots of resources, they can be highly motivated, they can spend a lot of time trying to break into environments. If I'm a retail company, and I work with a lot of retail organizations, they don't care about nation states. Guess what? China is not trying to break into In-N-Out Burger. They just don't care, right? Like, they're not interested in their credit card numbers or the personal information they hold. So if you're like one of those companies, what you're thinking about is it's these crime syndicates in Eastern Europe who are trying to infect the network, get the credit cards, because they can just go directly sell those on the black market to other people. And so it's just direct cash. And so that's who I try and protect against. And by the way, that's easier than trying to protect yourself from China. They're not that sophisticated. And the other thing is, it's not as valuable to them. So they're not going to spend as much time and effort making their way into one system. A lot of these data breaches, it's almost like they accidentally made their way into a lot of these companies. It's just like, oh yeah, I just fished 1 million people, and I realized suddenly I was in this organization that had 20 million credit card numbers. So of course I'm going to steal them. Why wouldn't I, right? But very often, if you have a profit motive, that's a very different perspective from I'm trying to disrupt this one organization.
So to add to that, if you don't mind, with that, it's fine. it's not necessarily, if you were a target, if you were a specific target, there's no way, along with a corporation, you're done. APT or not, if you are a target, all they need is a toehold to get into your network, and you have to protect them. But for other people, and the term hacker is kind of overused, but it's just to figure out what you can do. It's not necessarily malicious at any point, but I do it on wireless all the time just for fun, just to see, war drive. People are still using very insecure. They're using WPS, which is vulnerable to attack, or WET, which is horrible. Normally when you set stuff up, you try to do WPA. If anybody has wireless router, WPA. But you just do it because it's fun to do. It's fun to understand what's going on. And if you get into a system, it's not necessarily malicious, but you're in the system, and it's that sense of the original ownership of the system, like, wow, I feel good about myself because I've discovered something. And then at that point, whether you're going to release it to the company or sell it on the market, that's up to you. But nonetheless, it's just because it's fun. And the script kiddies, like we were talking about earlier, the tools out there are insane, and most of the security is humans are horrible. That is the one place you want to go in. Passwords to start. It's insane how bad security is.
Yeah.
How often is there any kind of prosecution or people who get caught and, punished for doing happening in their community?
Yeah, so it does happen. Our government, our federal government is very, they actually spend a lot of time and effort trying to find attackers. The problem is, one, it's fairly easy to hide your identity on the internet. And you have to understand, these are people who are most often, crime syndicates, most often they're in maybe Eastern Europe, where they're somewhere that's hard for our government locally to access. They're making their way through many different hops, hiding their identity. People do get caught, people do get prosecuted. But as a whole, as a percentage of how often how often attacks are happening, it's very small. So it's a really difficult challenge.
Who's doing threat assessment for broadcast?
Who is doing threat assessment for broadcast? I would say there's. I don't know specifically of companies who are purely focused on it. I know that there are security assessment companies that will look at a broad range of different environments. I don't really know who the experts are in broadcast. Maybe someone else in the room does.
One of the big things on servers is denial of service attacks, which for the hacktivists, the industrial networks seem like they're vulnerable to similar attacks.
Yep.
And what kinds of things can be done to help?
Yep. Yeah. So I think about denial of service, and there's internet scale denial of service. People taking down public sites, and they're using like amplifiers and botnets of different systems. Very often, taking down an industrial environment is just a matter of getting into it and then just flooding traffic to the wrong thing, or knowing the right command to send to that environment. And so, the unfortunate part of security is there is not one silver bullet that can protect you from that. It's kind of back to the 1, 2, 3. You got to start by protecting the network, make it harder to get in, protect the communication between things. So even if they get in, they can't make their way to all the different kinds of the environment. And then you want to protect the individual components like the PCs and the controllers. So even if they made their way into the network, the system itself isn't as easy to exploit. So you start layering, taking what we would call a defense in depth strategy, and you just make it harder and harder for it. There's a growing trend in the industrial side to start to correlate safety controls and security controls together, because security is becoming a safety issue for people who are building these systems. And when people think about safety, they have a mindset that is much more engineering driven and much more, we got to build it not to fail, than the way IT's been run. IT, people call themselves engineers in IT. We call them my software engineers, we call them engineers. But the smart ones say, we're not really doing any engineering. We're kind of doing more of an artsy thing of, we keep things running as well as we can, and we know it's not perfect. If people are going to die, if the system doesn't work, people treat it very differently. And in many ways, that's the kind of mindset we need to have around some of these systems. Even if it's just the availability or the uptime of your broadcast playout, maybe we need to have more of that safety mindset around how we do it versus the IT mindset. Yeah, safety is something people are very concerned about.
You mentioned that end users need to, push up the supply chain.
Yep.
Make their vendors be security conscious and whatnot. But are there tools that end users who are not security savvy can use to, evaluate? I'm going to buy product A or product B. How does somebody not in that, professional business make that determination?
Yeah, so sophisticated organizations in IT and in industrial side, the most sophisticated companies, will actually bring in tools and do penetration tests and assessments of the devices before they put them into production. And we see that we build security software. Our most sophisticated companies have their own teams of people, and they assess our software before we put it in. I would ask, I know we probably have some vendor people who make stuff, how often, when you're filling out, how often is the RFP for the things that you're selling? I assume you got RFPs sometimes. Are people asking about what's your secure software lifecycle? Have you conducted a penetration test of your system? Has an assessment been done? What's your remediation process for your security issues? Does that happen? No? If that doesn't happen, your customers are not holding you accountable for building a secure system, right? And so, that's what, if I was an end user, I would start with that before I said I'm going to go do a pen test. Now, you come back and you say you don't do any of that. Now we got to have a conversation, right? Because now, I care about the security of my environment. You just told me you're not building a secure system. You proved it to me by saying you're not doing any of that stuff. There's no way that you could tell me you built a secure system when you didn't have a threat model, you didn't have a secure software development lifecycle, you're not doing assessments, you don't have external pen tests. Those are the things you need to do to build a secure device. If you're not doing those things, you're building insecure devices. And if our industry is accepting that, then that's the industry's responsibility.
You're talking about, even at that level, a pretty high level of knowledge on the part of the end user to be able to ask those questions. If we look at the DDoS attacks, recently, and they say, well, these are all consumer IoT devices. How do I know if I'm buying a security camera from Costco?
Consumer is a different challenge. The consumer challenge is consumers don't care. In fact, I've had this debate with a couple of different people. If the consumers don't care, I'll give you an example. Everyone probably has a wireless router at home. Our security researchers did a report on wireless home routers. You go Google Tripwire or Soho routers, you'll find it. They reported everything to the vendors because we do it responsibly at Tripwire. Before we go and publish it, we tell the vendors what they did wrong, how to fix it, and we wait for them to fix it. We think that would be a responsible way of acting. The response that our researchers get back from consumer companies has been, our customers don't care about security. We don't need to fix these problems. We fix problems in our corporate products. Consumer products are not built securely. And so the problem that you now run into, we were talking earlier about Bruce Schneier, who's a security expert, and how do you solve this? If the consumers don't care and the companies don't care, but we have this problem in the world, which is millions of insecure devices actually fundamentally make our whole world insecure, who can fix that, right? And that's a question. Maybe the government needs to step into that, or maybe you need something like a UL listing, or you need some sort of different approach. But if you're talking about selling to companies, and we sell mostly to corporations and enterprises and large organizations, it's the security people who are going to have the conversation with the people who are buying software and are going to say, these are the things that we need to start asking them. And so, so that's why I go to vendors and say, these are the things you should be doing to secure. I go to end customers and say, this is what you should be asking your vendors. And actually some of these standards and frameworks, they talk about, here are the 20 things you should be asking your vendors. So you're not getting a lot of those questions today. I would believe over the next couple of years, because I've seen it in IT and ICS, in automotive, in all these different industries, those questions start to get asked and people start to change their behavior.
I think we've seen it in some product lines and with some customers. So, I remember, how many people remember the room down for several hours. And right after that, we had a slew of conversations with the director of IT, not the broadcast guys down there, but the director of IT, and he had all those questions. You know, what are you doing to put virus protection on your computer? Oh, I can't do that because, you know, it disrupts the real-time performance of our servers. And yeah, so there's a sensitivity around that, and larger companies, of course, have this sensitivity in the IT part of their organization, and those that have melded the broadcast and IT parts of the organization together are changing the way they approach this. But I would say, you know, our industry is way behind where the sophisticated IT, enterprise level IT guys are in terms of awareness, following specific protocols to implement and test, do pen testing. It's way behind. My last assignment was at a financial services company, and they had a very, very, very secure approach to broadcast type equipment going into their facility. And it just blew my mind. And I've been in broadcast for a long, long time. Just night and day. Night and day. Unbelievable. And I think it's coming to broadcast. You know, getting equipment screened and accredited through an organization before it's allowed at the door, not sending it out for repair because you're sending out configuration data and IP addresses that could facilitate attacks into the organization. Yeah, just ridiculous level of security.
Yep.
Do we want to talk about what the worst case scenario is of somebody getting malware in a broadcast facility?
What's the worst case scenario?
It stops working.
Stops working.
Everything.
Yeah.
Born on the Disney Channel.
The big one is attacking the EAS systems and putting out false alerts.
False, actually crossing into physical harm to people because of behavior.
Setting
This
out
is,
a tornado warning, you know, when there is no tornado.
well, this is like I'll give you the analogy to the utility market. Just the idea of taking down a utility and shutting off the power in the wrong part of the country at the wrong time of year kills people. When the power goes out and you don't have air conditioning in the south, people die. And so you think about, well, what would be, is there a timing, is there a place where just downtime or false information could actually create physical harm to people? You worry about that. The other thing that people don't think about as often, but we've seen in the industrial world a lot, is sometimes you can send the wrong commands, make things work the wrong way, and you actually destroy the physical system. So if you can do that, now you think about how long would the downtime, what would be the order of magnitude of the damage, how long would it take, especially these specialized systems. If someone can take down, we worry about this in the power grid, you know, generators and substation equipment, it could take a year to build some of that new equipment. I mean, there's a long backlog. You can't just order that on Amazon and have it in 2 business days, right? So what would be the downtime and risk if those kind of things happen?
Speaking about that for the broadcast industry, so we talk about a lot of the physical, the IP, you know, we're hitting fiber, satellite, signals that go over satellite. Satellites are up in space. You can reprogram to an extent, but a lot of the encryption modules, latency is big. So what do? That is your weakest point, and that's what I would attack, is your satellite points. Because you can't, and it's not a priority. We have NSA satellites up there that still aren't fixed either, and they're a higher priority. How many people are putting people into space to fix your satellites? No one. That is your weakest point right there. And you can't do anything about it.
Cool.
Thank you very much.